Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending. This is the Innovate discussion panel talking about the future of video over IP and how this trend is going to progress. I'm joined by an illustrious panel with me, and they're going to introduce themselves to you right now.
Great. I'm Simon Faree from AV Distributors. We distribute the ZV product and pretty experienced with video over IP.
Tim Arrell, Rutledge AV, head of the engineering team.
And I'm Nick. Oh, I'm loud actually. I'm Nick Ossadi. I'm the director of Freedom Technology, AV Systems Integrator.
So let's get right into it. Video over IP. It's here right now. It's an actuality. What would you say are adoption rates in Australia, and how close are they to 100%?
How close they are to 100%?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question to start off with. I would say that it's we're still in early adoption phase. I think. Please interject, right? This is my opinion.
From a distribution perspective as well, absolutely.
Okay, right. Well, there you go. The guy with the numbers in front. There's certainly an appetite for AV over IP. But it's, there's a couple of barriers to that. One is about understanding of how that works within a network environment, and particularly a converged network environment. Obviously, costs. Sometimes it's also refresh cycles.
Yeah, I think so, and I think a lot of it is really driven by that IT side of things, because if you're having to provision a specific network to support the technology, it can be a fairly large cost impact, whereas if the network is being provisioned to support that, and it is, like Nick said, converged, then the cost structure is quite different. So, and I think that's where it's starting to take off, because the network infrastructure is driving that more.
Especially when you're talking about the 10 gig versus the 1 gig space as well. A very specialist on the 10 gig, but the 1 gig is a lot more widely adopted.
Yeah, it's commonplace right now in corporate and education and so forth.
So my talks with end users have been very interesting on the topic, and so one end user from a university in Southeast Asia went as far as saying that he preferred HT-based to the IP that we have now, simply because it's another layer of approvals he needs to get from his IT department in order to get the system up and running. So in your opinion, how difficult is it to requisition the bandwidth and the infrastructure that AV now needs to deliver video from point to point?
Well, I think, again, that's really what we find is that depending on the client you're dealing with and those end users, I find that it's very driven by the knowledge and the exception of the network team around whether they're really keen to have it converged on their network, because they're already planning all of the security and all of the networking around that, so that the network is already ready to go for those technologies. Whereas if you're talking about it from an AV perspective, if that has to then be approved by the network teams, then it's a much more complex process. So I think it's when they're driving it.
It's about how gutsy they are, really. About,
Well, it's also skill set, right? So a lot of corporate network teams have a skill set around provisioning for the standard corporate environments, and don't necessarily have a lot of skill and capability and experience, for that matter, in, for example, multicast traffic, which is really what we're talking about. How do we provision for the bandwidth that is required and in an acceptable time frame? So, they don't necessarily, they may have one or two layers of quality of service on their network. They may not have a very deep dive. They may have, quite an easy implementation requirement. So they may not necessarily have that capability or that experience internally. We've seen that a lot. The other side that you picked up was about approvals. So, if you ask any IT network administrator to put something on the network, you know what the answer is going to be. Yeah. It's going, what is it?
Do I have to?
Do I know about it?
Which
is it
network?
already approved? And and this is in any network, let alone when we get into, say, a banking environment that has very strict security implementations, because they have real world impacts. They take their network down, they lose large percentages of money. So there's everybody would like a converged network, because we have one set of switches to manage, all the devices can run on it, but it's not just as simple as saying, well, that's a good idea, let's just go forward, because they may not have that skill set, and you may have some other corporate barriers of restriction. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's that security side of things that the IT world's very aware of, and AV is only really just starting to come to terms with that. Because if you're getting to the level where you're saying, well, you have to manage certificates and how devices just connect on the network, if the AV team can't provide that information to the IT team in their language, they're just going to say, oh, nah.
Absolutely correct. I find that's my biggest task at the moment is actually having discussions with networking teams specifically about encryption security.
Yeah.
So I mean, everybody knows what IGMP is, and that's the basis of everything how it works. And everybody understands that. Even your dumbest switch has IGMP. It's all about the security. Absolutely.
And do you feel that the video over IP products on the market right now are presented with the language of IT in mind when you walk into your clients? Do you have to explain to them what they do and that they're secure, or does the box itself do it for you guys?
I think we're seeing an increasing adoption of that in all the products. Yeah, it's by necessity. You need to be able to talk the language if you're going to sit on the network. So, and I think all manufacturers are acutely aware of that and meeting that challenge. So, I don't see a big issue in that side. It's really whether there is we talked really about 1 gig networks before. 1 gig's very popular. Everyone has them. But giving 10 gig to the endpoint, it's a different story, right? So again, but when we're working, so a lot of people will do 1 gig, but the problem is that you can get to that 1 gig bandwidth capacity very quickly. We've done some projects which have multi-floor, multi-devices, like hundreds of devices on a network. You can't just route between floors, right? You think of the backplane of what you would need. If I've got a streaming device that say does half a gig network traffic, right? There's quite a few different them around. If you go and see them around here, understand? And that's to send one video stream. You want to send a video stream between one multicast stream between floors. What if I need to send 5? It starts becoming a huge impact, right?
Sure. Well, everybody always thinks it's just easier than, or as easy as just adding network switches, but your links are probably the most important part.
Yeah, the other thing we're starting to see is that major IT vendors like Cisco, probably the biggest example, are deploying networks now with layer 3 edge topology as opposed to what used to be VLAN layer 2 to the edge. So now the conversation with the IT team has changed and it's become more complicated because IGMP and all of these things are now running at the edge rather than deeper into the network. So all of these things are making that discussion more difficult. The AV, going back to your question, I guess, the AV providers are definitely getting up to that level. But because that's progressing so quickly, I think it's that whole thing where, AV's trying to get up to that level where IT's been for many years. And I think it's definitely improving, and definitely the vendors are very aware of that now. But the discussion with the IT team is still, it has its challenges, I guess.
And video over IP, like you mentioned, is primarily being deployed as VLAN, which is it's connected to the network, but it's still its own little island by itself. And you mentioned that layer 3 is being brought to the edge. That was going to be my question. Do you think that's going to continue, or do you think that we're going to move? Is VLAN the end game, or are we eventually going to come onto the converged network with everything else in the end?
Good question, right?
Depends who you talk to.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Cisco definitely pushes that topology. And they are a major player, so they have a big impact on that.
Look, the other point of it is, and this is where it comes to at a very high level, is what's the expectation of a user to get out of this? What are we doing by putting video over a network? We have laptops, we want to put them on displays. That's a very common use case of what we're all doing. Video over IP works really well when I need to be really flexible to do that. So I might have, hundreds of little spots or 10 spots that I need to be able to get that. I don't, on a HT-based-T style topology, I've got to patch it, I've got to bring it into a dedicated port and so forth. It's difficult for that end user. Video over IP changes that and makes it a lot easier in terms of that user experience. If that's a real functional outcome, then there's real merit for it, you know. In other ways, there's still plenty of place for stuff that doesn't have to run on network, because what we're trying to say here is there's a lot of benefit, but there's also a lot of challenges. To the point of what you're talking about you know, are VLANs an appropriate level we go to layer 3? Again, it comes down to that use case. You know, why do you need a full layer 3 topology there? If you have the density of devices that you need on the network, you might be demanding to have that, you know, rather than just saying, yeah, you know, we have finite address space, you know, that we need to be able to deal with. So
It's the analog to digital switch all over again.
sure.
That's right.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
I'm going to open the floor up to questions. If anyone has something they would like to ask our panelists, now will be the time. I think we're good, gentlemen.
Excellent.
You've explained everything. Once again, thank you so much for your time.